Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was the Green Party and Socialist Party candidate for president in 2020. And this podcast, Green Socialist Notes, is about continuing to educate and advocate for the Eco Socialist program that we ran on in 2020. And, probably the most outrageous thing that happened this week was Trump's white genocide lie. That's the thing that just got my gut. He staged another reality TV show and ambushed South African President Cyril Ramaphosa on Wednesday. It was clearly a planned stunt, just like what he pulled off against President Zelensky of Ukraine at the end of February. And so he used the Oval Office as a staging to make preposterously false claims about a white genocide in South Africa. And it just showed what a crude racist pig Trump is. It further ratcheted down the poor regard that the United States has in the rest of the world, both among the leaders of states and the general public. And Ramaphosa did a pretty good job of deflecting Trump's BS with humor, like apologizing that he didn't have a plane to give Trump, like Qatar did. And but Trump is just making himself the laughing stock of the world. And I don't know what else to say about that, but it was a disgusting display. And that was on Wednesday. And on Thursday, the U.S. followed that up in the House by passing probably the most reactionary budget bill in U.S. history. It passed by one vote, 215 to 214, with all the Democrats and a couple Republican deficit hawks voting against. A few Democrats and a few Republicans didn't vote. I think one voted present, maybe one Republican. Anyway, what this does, the main thing it does is extend the 2017 Trump tax cuts that would have expired. And what that means is about $3.8 trillion more money that the rich get to keep over the next 10 years, while most of the rest of us are going to pay higher federal income taxes. And these tax cuts, $3.8 trillion, are going to be paid for by cuts to Medicaid, Medicare, education, housing, and environmental protection primarily, also by a lot of borrowing. In fact, they raised the debt limit by $4 trillion. And the debt, according to the Congressional Budget Office, where I'm getting most of these figures I'm going to give you, is projected to grow by 3.3 trillion over 10 years. And we're already right now servicing the existing debt, which I guess is over 30 trillion now, at the cost of about $1 trillion a year. So 800 something billion. It's almost as much as the military budget. It's a huge expense. So as a result of this budget, if it goes through, it's going to go to the Senate. They'll modify it maybe a little bit, but with a 53 to 47 Republican majority in the Senate, it's going to pass. So what we're talking about is probably going to come to pass, that Trump's going to sign this budget bill. And so as a result, Congressional Budget Office projections, 7.6 million people are going to lose their Medicaid coverage. They added work requirements for individuals receiving Medicaid, and they have to work at least 20 hours a week. Maybe they can document they're looking for work, but that just makes more of a burden for people just to get their health care. It will trigger $500 billion cuts in Medicare over the next 10 years, and that's not in the budget, but this is going to be triggered, according to the Congressional Budget Office, by the requirements of the statutory Pay-As-You-Go or Pay-Go Act, which is a fiscally conservative bill we can thank the Democrats for. The Congressional Democrats pushed it, and it was signed by Obama in 2010. And now we're paying the consequences for their neoliberal crap. The budget that passed cuts food aid, SNAP, $300 billion over the next 10 years. Work requirements are added to that. This affects 42 million Americans who now receive SNAP benefits. and they expect 3 million people just to lose their benefits as a result of these changes. It cuts $330 billion to student loan programs. You know, they don't want us educated. They don't want the working class to have access to higher education. So they cut the student loan programs. They cut all the consumer clean energy tax credits in the Inflation Reduction Act, as limited as it was, but it was something. All those tax credits for consumers for electric vehicles and solar panels. And it eliminates most of the business tax credits for non-carbon energy, except they made exceptions for biofuels because they're playing to the farmers who grow corn for ethanol, and for nuclear power, which isn't really carbon free, neither are biofuels, but they keep their tax credits, which, you know, is not good for the climate. You know, investing in nuclear power. In fact, I think Trump last night put out an executive order. I don't know if it has much effect, that they need to permit new nuclear power plants faster. Of course, putting all that money into nuclear power is a diversion from putting it into renewable power, particularly wind and solar. You get a lot more energy, a lot quicker for a lot less money spent with solar and wind than you do with nuclear. But, you know, Trump is a damn idiot, and so are all the people following him. And then what did increase was military spending, up by over $150 billion, bringing the total of military spending to well over $1 trillion a year. In there is $20 billion of a boondoggle for the speculative Golden Dome missile defense system, which just trying to implement it is destabilizing because it would eliminate the ability of a second strike, a retaliatory strike by somebody we hit a first strike with, which encourages them to make a first strike. It's destabilizing in terms of the deterrence regime, and it militarizes space because, you know, they're going to try to put missiles in space that'll hit intercontinental missiles or any other kind of nuclear missiles aimed at the U.S. And the technology, I mean, what you're like trying to do is hit a bullet with a pistol while it's already, you know, it's already been shot. It's very difficult. And they put $20 billion in, but that's just a first down payment. It will probably cost hundreds of billions of dollars to design and build it if it works at all. So the military gets what it needs. And then they put $175 billion of new spending, additional spending for mass deportations and immigration enforcement. And that's more than any country in the world spends on its military, except the US and China, which spent $314 billion last year. But it's more than Russia's spending now, and they've been jacking up their military spending, or any other country but the US and China. Of that $175 billion, $45 billion is for new immigration jails. And that for immigration detention is 13 times more than ICE currently spends. It also adds $50 billion for that border wall boondoggle, $8 billion for immigration enforcement officers, and just $14 billion to pay for deporting people. It makes it more difficult to get into the country. It requires now a $1,000 application fee if you're seeking asylum, you know, and poor people running from, you know, war and persecution often don't have money. They're just fleeing for their lives. So that is a barrier to asylum. And then it adds a $3,500 fee for families to unite with minors that hit the border unaccompanied. So this is just cruel, and that's and a waste of money too. So there are other things in this bill that haven't got so much attention. It prohibits any funds from being used to carry out court orders holding executive branch officials in contempt of court. In other words, they're going to tell the judge, we can't correct what you want us to correct because we don't have money for it, and we can't spend it statutorily, which creates a conflict between the judicial and executive branch, which is a constitutional conflict, a constitutional crisis. So that's built into the bill. It gives Trump the power to repeal nonprofit status of organizations he doesn't like. Obviously that's going to be aimed at the Palestinian Solidarity and Climate Action organizations, but it'll be anybody that Trump doesn't like. It prohibits state or local regulation of artificial intelligence. And The Lever, which is a publication associated with Sirota, what's his first name? Anyway, and what it could also be used is to prevent regulation of private equity firms and other big landlords who are using AI software to raise rents to what they think is the maximum they can squeeze out of the market. So it's broader than just what you think of as AI. It insulates firms using AI to squeeze consumers and squeeze workers. And as I said, the Senate's likely to modify the bill a little bit, but it's not going to change fundamentally because the Republicans have a 53-47 majority. So, basically what we see are huge increases in debt, huge cuts to social spending, and that's in order to pay for huge tax cuts for the rich and huge increases in military and anti-immigrant spending. As I said, it's probably the most reactionary budget bill in the history of the United States. And it looks like we're stuck with it because the left, and that I would include the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, which might want to fight this, we don't have the power. We don't have the elected officials. We don't have the organization to do disruptive, nonviolent resistance. We're just not there. So we're in a bad place. But we're not in as bad a place as the people in Gaza. A little food aid got in this week, but it's not nearly enough. Basically, they're being starved to death, and Israel continues to bomb the hell out of them. And as Netanyahu said, the goal is to ethnically cleanse Gaza. Netanyahu said it out loud on Thursday. He said he wants to do what Trump wants to do, and that is clear the area, to build a resort. And he said the war will continue until all the Palestinians in Gaza are dead or deported. And let's put an article in the chat about that from Truth Out, so you can, don't just take my word for it. Read that news report. So this is the goal of the fascist government ruling in Tel Aviv. And it's not popular with the Israeli population. 70% of Israelis want the war to end. But Netanyahu and his right-wing allies continue the war because that's how they stay in power. Because if there's an election, they're going to get rejected. Netanyahu in particular. The right wing will get their share in the parliament, but it'll be a change in the government of Israel. And that's why they're fighting the war, to just avoid an election. One thing good that happened this week is the UK and the EU, condemned what Israel's doing in terms they haven't before and are threatening sanctions against Israel, which are long overdue. So the U.S. isn't doing that. So the U.S. and Israel are alone in the world on the Gaza question. And for its unconditional support for this genocide in Gaza, the U.S. is becoming a pariah rogue state in the eyes of the world. And, even Trump sees this, and that's why he's gone around Netanyahu on Iran negotiations, Houthi ceasefire, and has even condemned the food blockade and the civilian bombing. But what counts is he's not doing anything about it. So Israel has a blank check from the U.S. Our weapons keep going there, and the genocide continues. It's just unbelievable to watch this happen, live streamed and on TV, and it's not being stopped. And then Ukraine, another interesting, eventful week. Trump and Putin talked for 2 hours on Monday. And that was hours after Russia had launched its largest missile and drone attacks on Ukrainian cities of the whole war, which says something where Putin's coming from. And after Trump went into that meeting, having seen the negotiations between Russia and Ukraine lead to nothing, not a ceasefire, not even, a date for further talks, Trump said, well, it's going to have to be me talking to Putin. It's going to stop this. And after he said that, after the call with Putin, he said, Ukraine and Russia are going to have to figure this out. We're out of here, basically. and he's walking away. He said, it's not my war, it's Biden's war. And so, Russia and Ukraine will have to figure it out, which contradicted what he'd said a couple of days before. But we come to expect that from Trump. Trump also told the EU leaders in the follow-up call after talking to Putin that Putin told him he doesn't want to end the war. And now Trump denies that, but there's a lot of verification from EU sources. So I think that's probably what Trump told the EU leaders. So the EU added those sanctions they threatened, but they are still limited. I mean, the EU is not doing what it could. For example, the new sanctions go after 200 of nearly 900 shadow tankers that bring natural gas, liquefied natural gas, and oil, export them out of Russia. And Svetlana Romanko, who we've had on this podcast, she's with Razum We Stand, Ukrainian-based campaign to tighten fossil fuel sanctions on Russia and rebuild Ukraine and the world around renewables. She's got an article just saying the EU's got to do more. And so let's put that in the chat. It's titled, "The EU knows how to stop Russian energy, it just won't." So hopefully people in Europe and leaders in Europe are getting that message from Svetlana. But, that's where it's at. Now, yesterday, and hopefully continuing this weekend, Russia and Ukraine began to exchange 1,000 POWs. Yesterday, 390 were changed. What's interesting is the so-called POWs that Russia gave back to Ukraine, 120 of them are civilians. And they were detained and imprisoned in the Russian-occupied territories after it invaded. So there are now 390 more witnesses, including 120 civilians, to the Russian crimes against humanity that it is committing in its treatment of its prisoners. Andrei Kostin, who's the general prosecutor of Ukraine, has estimated, based on interviews with POWs coming back, that 90% of Ukrainians have been subjected to torture, rape, sexual harassment, sexual violence, and other forms of ill treatment that are illegal. Ukraine lets the UN and the Red Cross inspect their detention facilities for Russian POWs. Russia doesn't do the same thing. So the UN and the Red Cross can't see what's happening to the prisoners that Russia holds. So if there's ever justice at the end of this war, there's going to be a lot of people guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity for this ill treatment of not just prisoners of war, soldiers, but also civilians that were forcibly taken by Russia when they occupied Ukrainian territory. So, where does that leave us now? It's clear Trump wants to do business with Russia. He talked about that after his call, and he doesn't care about Ukraine. What Trump hopes to do is carve up Ukraine between him and Putin. That's what the minerals deal is about, getting profits and having Ukraine pay for any weapons they might get from the West or the U.S. And Russia, gets oblasts in the East, regions in the East that it's conquered, and maybe some more in what the U.S. has actually proposed. Russia's demanding that Ukraine pull out of oblasts that Russia claims to have annexed, where Ukraine is still in control. And it appears the U.S. has backed that in Trump and Witkoff's statements. And that's the kind of deal Trump is hoping to cut with Putin. But Putin wants all of Ukraine, and he's just playing Trump. So right now they're talking about further talks at the Vatican. But yesterday, Foreign Minister Lavrov said, well, we can't have two Orthodox Christian countries negotiating on Catholic territory, which is just ridiculous. I mean, Turkey is Islamic, Muslim majority. I mean, that's just a way of trying to say, Russia doesn't really want negotiations. And, to those people on the pacifist and campus left in the U.S. who have been saying, we demand a ceasefire and negotiations. I mean, hasn't it penetrated your thick skulls that Russia doesn't want a ceasefire? They're saying we got to negotiate a deal first before we can have a ceasefire. And now they don't want to negotiate. So, what's your peace policy? You don't have one, and you need to face that. So, on the U.S. side, in the Senate, there are now 80 co-sponsors of this Sanction Russia Act of 2025, which would really sanction Russia. It would impose and sanction those that trade with Russia. It would impose immediately 500% sanctions on any country buying oil, gas, petroleum products, or uranium from Russia. And after 6 months, that would increase to 1,000%. And that would force China, India, and any other country in the world to choose between doing business with Russia and the U.S. And the U.S. is a much, much bigger market. So it would be a strong incentive. It would also wreak havoc on global trade. And so that makes me doubt that Trump is, as crazy he is about tariffs, is going to want to do that. Rubio is actually talking about this bill every day, but he's not in charge. So I think in the end, this thing is just going to sit in the Congress. So, Putin told Trump in that conversation he doesn't want to end the war. And so what does Trump do? Instead of imposing sanctions on Russia, he imposes a 50% tariff on the EU. He sanctions the EU. So that tells you which side Trump is on. So we're in a situation where Ukraine and Europe are on their own against Trump and Putin because Trump and Putin are allied. So what can we do? I think we should be pressuring Congress to tell Trump in no uncertain terms that the U.S. should continue to share intelligence and allow Ukraine to purchase, because the U.S. isn't giving anything more to Ukraine under Trump, to purchase weapons, particularly the Patriot air defense systems. They're defensive weapons. They're essential. I mean, last night on my phone, the air alerts I get, of Kyiv, they were under bombardment for 10 hours. And I've seen some of the pictures online. There were a lot of fires in Kyiv, the capital. So, Russia's offensive continues. And, the Patriot system can shoot down the missiles that no other system can. And they can also hit drones, which other air defense systems can. So, I think that's what we should be pressuring Congress to pressure Trump on. And I think that's about the most we can expect with Trump in the presidency, despite overwhelming public and apparently congressional support for Ukraine. It's just Congress doesn't have a spine, and they're still cowing, particularly the Republicans, before Trump. So not any good news in that report, but that's where we're at. And I'll, at the end of the show, tell you about a presentation I'm going to give about independent political action under Trump Wednesday night, which will try to point toward a strategy. I've talked about it on this podcast, basically building from below, electing people to local office, creating a foundation for getting into state legislatures, and then the U.S. House, which is where the Greens or the left in this country could get a foothold. But it has to be an independent left. It can't be, the squad and the Progressive Caucus basically whining about what the corporate Democrats are doing and the Republicans are doing, but not having any power to resist it, and in fact giving legitimacy to the corporate Democrats because they're in the same party. And in the end, they say vote for those corporate Democrats against the crazy Republicans. So it's not much of a choice for progressive America, which, as I've said, I documented in another article I had in New Politics. We put in the chat before, it's called A Political Paradox, how a progressive-leaning public elected a right-wing president. And, you can look at that discussion, but the point I'm getting at is when I look at where the people stand, they're way to the left of the Democrats, let alone the Republicans, on the economic progressive policies as well as the social policies. Americans are much more socially tolerant and against discrimination and bigotry than the conventional wisdom has it. And so there's a huge political vacuum that the Greens or somebody has got to fill. And that, to me, is, the primary task we face. So with that, I'm interested in seeing what you have to say, what questions or comments you have. Scout Trooper 164. Any thoughts on the plans made by the EU to make ATACMS and other missiles that Patriots could use so it helps Ukraine get around the dependence on the U.S.? Well, the ATACMS are offensive weapons. They're longer range missiles. So the Patriot air defense systems don't use those missiles. Unless you know something I don't know. There's a anti air missile that the Patriot system uses that's adapted to the Patriot system. But the EU planning to make missiles that the Patriots can use is important. The question is, how fast can the EU ramp it up? They are talking like they're in an emergency, but they're not yet acting like it. And that's going to be crucial. How fast can the EU ramp up weapons for Ukraine and for particularly, defensive systems like the Patriot missile system? There are a lot of questions about what the EU is doing because the actual plans coming out of some of these countries, they're buying weapons that aren't going to help Ukraine. It's like the U.S. We're buying fancy weapons that in these battlefields we now have with the drones and the trenches really aren't that applicable. And so, the EU doesn't need to build up its navy. It needs to build up its, ground defenses and supply Ukraine with those things. So there's a big debate, particularly on the left, but in the EU generally about, okay, we're going to, ramp up defense spending. What are we buying? So that's something to keep an eye on. Reason rifts. Scout Trooper 164, the biggest problem is most NATO countries are reliant on satellite data. It's not the weapon system. Yeah, and the U.S. has the best satellite intelligence. So that is another area where the EU is, they are talking about substituting their own systems for those they rely on the U.S. And again, the question is, okay, they're talking about how fast are they going to move? How fast can they move on the technological level? Those are important considerations. But, the intelligence that the U.S. provides to Ukraine, it tells them where the Russians are coming from, helps them target. Although there are partisans in the occupied territories as well as Russia for Ukraine that are providing coordinates for a lot of these targets. And I think that explains why Ukrainian targeting of military installations, air defense systems, and so forth in Crimea and the other occupied territories are so accurate when the Ukrainians shoot at them. So that on-the-ground intelligence helps, but it doesn't substitute for the satellite data. No doubt about that. Scout Trooper 164. As much as Putin claims he doesn't want to stop the war, I highly doubt he can keep it going forever or doing it forever. Also, any thoughts on Russia saying the Soviet Union legally still exists? Complete fantasy. I know they run around with those Soviet flags, for a government that can legitimately be called fascist, if not just authoritarian right wing, but I think that's trying to really rehabilitate, particularly Stalin as a repressive, strong leader. He can't keep doing it forever. That's true. I mean, the economic and human costs of this attritional war strategy that Russia uses. I mean, they sacrifice thousands and thousands of people. They lose 1,000 people or more a day in these, they call them meat wave assaults on Ukrainian front lines. And they just keep pouring people into that. But they're paying a lot for volunteers who, basically take the sign up payment and give it to their families, which desperately need it in a lot of areas of Russia where there's a lot of poverty. And then they go and die in Ukraine. But they're having trouble getting volunteers. So they're relying on foreign troops like North Korea, people often tricked into fighting for the Russians, people from Nepal, Cuba, Colombia, Africa. There's a lot of people get there, even Chinese volunteers, who are, told they're going to go there and do some, support job way away from the front lines, producing weapons or, transporting materials or, being cooks and, providing food, that kind of thing. And they end up in these meat waves. And so they're not happy about that. So yeah, there are limits to what Russia can do. You read the military analyses and they range from Russia, basically running out of armored vehicles and enough troops this summer as they mount another offensive, to those who say they can't do it too much longer, but they can do it for another year or two. Sort of the median analysis is after spending what they got this summer, they're going to have to do a new mobilization, which is politically precarious for Putin because the population, even though with all the propaganda in Russia, supports the so-called special military operation, they don't want to go fight in it. And they won't be happy if there's mobilization. And it'll contradict what, the Kremlin's been saying, that everything's going according to plan and all that BS. So the mobilization will be problematic for Putin politically. And, one thing to keep in mind is while it looks like Putin and the Kremlin have a tight lid on the Russian population, the history of Russia is getting into wars and basically them coming home to roost in the form of radical social change. From the Crimean War in the mid-1800s, which led to the freedom of the serfs, to World War, the war they initiated with Japan, they thought would be an easy war, and it wasn't. Japan kicked their butts, and you had the 1905 revolution, and then they got in World War I, and that came back with the 1917 revolution, and then they went into Afghanistan, and out of that came the dissolution of the Soviet Union. So while things look stable in Russia, I wouldn't count on it. You don't know when things might break, but the thing you say in your question, Putin can't keep doing this forever, I think is true. It's just a question of when Russia will break. There's also the question of when Ukraine will break, if Russia does break through. I don't think that's likely, but it is a possibility. War is unpredictable. And, the ceasefire that Trump first called for and Zelensky backed would be a good idea, but it's obvious Putin doesn't want it because he thinks he's winning the war. Although if you look at all that's going on, not just on the front lines, but in the Black Sea and these drone attacks that and long-range attacks that Ukraine is doing in Russia, and the massive losses of Russia with its offensives, it's a quagmire. It's a stalemate. Russia's not winning. Ukraine is not losing. Ukraine is not winning and Russia's not losing either. It's a stalemate. And is that what Putin wants to keep doing forever? Trump couldn't care less. But Putin, it's costing him. And we'll see at what point things might break in Russia or Ukraine. As far as the Soviet Union legally still existing, I didn't see that, but Russia did inherit the Soviet Union's seat on the Security Council, and Ukrainians and others have questioned that. It's a legal gray area. And meanwhile, this week, Russia's back to saying, Lavrov was saying this week, we can't sign a peace deal with Ukraine as long as Zelensky's the president because his term in office ran out. Of course, the Ukrainian constitution says they can't have presidential elections during a war. So, Ukraine actually is on good legal grounds, but Russia's making an issue of it. So all this legal stuff is talking points. I think what matters is what happens on the battlefield. That's where things, this war is going to keep going, and that's where a lot of things are going to be decided, unfortunately. Charles Keener, Israelis do support expulsion. Okay, this is in addition to the article from Truth Out by Sharon Zhang that I put in there. And it's from the Palestinian Chronicle. Oh, he's saying the Israeli population supports expulsion. Nearly half support biblical massacre. Yeah, I would not dispute that. I think while the figure that 70% want the war to end, that then it becomes a question on what terms. And it's more than nationalism. It's a nationalist chauvinism against the Palestinian Arabs that is, just become endemic in Israel. It is, and Israel public opinion wasn't always that way. It's just gotten worse. So, yeah, that makes that situation more intractable. And let's put that in the chat. I guess it's in the chat as a question because I want to read that article. Well, thanks for that information, Charles. Scout Trooper 164. Hey, Howie, do you have any thoughts on David Hogue wanting to remove the centrists and old folks in the DNC? Might be where he gets lost in the sauce, but fuck will be that weird to watch. That will be weird to watch. Okay. Yeah, I haven't paid close attention to David Hogg. I know he was, he was in that high school class that was victimized by a mass shooting, and he's become a gun control advocate and got involved in Democratic Party politics and got himself on the DNC. And then, he's pushed in a progressive direction. And I think, lost in the sauce. That's what I was talking about when I ran for president. If you want progressive changes, but you support the Democrats, and you vote for them, you get lost in the sauce because nobody knows that that's what you actually stand for. Hogue can speak up, but if he remains loyal to the Democratic Party, then he's like the rest of the progressives in Congress. They talk, but in the end, they back their corporate leadership. Like when it comes to presidential and Senate races, and even House races. I mean, AOC at first was supporting the Justice Democrats and other groups like that, making progressive challenges to centrist Democrats. She doesn't do that anymore. She's so her voice is lost in the sauce. And I respect David Hogg. I think he's, from what I know, he's been consistent in his positions. It's just the Democratic Party's a dead end. And if he realizes that, then the question is, what are you going to do? Unfortunately, the Greens are not a strong, viable alternative at this point that somebody like him would go to. So that's why, there's talk in other quarters about starting a new progressive independent party. That keeps coming up. The Greens are not strong enough and particularly well enough organized to incorporate people like David Hogg if he decides, the Democrats are a dead end. So, you're right that it'll be weird to watch. It bears watching, and hopefully it's not weird. Hopefully David Hogg, sticks to his principles and draws the right conclusion that Democratic Party is a dead end. Via email, thoughts about GOP's margin in the House widening again after the death of another Democrat who was known to be sick when running for re-election. Yeah, I'm trying to remember his name. I think it was a Pennsylvania Democrat, fairly liberal, not a strong progressive, but he said he had throat cancer. I thought he announced that the day after the election. I think he might have known he was sick, but he didn't make it public till after the election. And the Republicans have enough of a margin that it's going to take a lot of deaths of Republicans for the Democrats to get control of the House before the midterms. I think the Democrats have a good chance in the midterms because the Republicans have been so atrocious, and there'll be an anti-Trump vote that's going to help the Democrats. But don't underestimate the ability of the Democrats to grab defeat from the jaws of victory in 2026. So we'll see. But, I think it's a pretty good chance you get a Democratic House, which is going to slow the legislative moves of Trump, but he's mostly moving by executive order and just messing with the executive branch of government. But the only piece of legislation he cares about in this first 2 years is that budget bill we talked about. And that looks like it's going to pass. I don't know of any other legislative initiatives the Republicans are pushing hard. They don't really care. They're going to be a mostly do-nothing Congress, which is something the Democrats could run on them against, like Truman did a long time ago when he made that great comeback against Dewey in '48. But I don't know. It's hard to know what the Democrats' message is. They got a lot of messengers, but no agreement on what the message is. Andrew Hager. Howie, is it too late to call our congressfolk in moral and ethical opposition of the Trump administration? I'm trying to find people I can schedule a mass calling with to make our voices heard. Yeah, I don't know about a mass, like a Zoom call. I would make it in person. Get the congressperson, out to meet the people. Maybe the Zoom calls work with a member of Congress, but it would seem to me they'd have much more control over, what they're hearing from the constituents. A lot of these, even in-person meetings, are highly scripted and controlled. You have to RSVP, be approved, get a ticket to get in. That's the way the Democrat did his here in central New York, Syracuse area last month or earlier this month. But I think, and also, individual calls, just encourage lots of people to make a call rather than a collective call. But I think you also want to try to get them out, to public events where they have to answer in public. And also you can, picket their headquarters with your message. And I think, Republicans should be hit with this as well as Democrats. So it's not too late. It's timely. It's always timely. Charles Keener. They're also thinking about a new progressive party in the UK. I hope they work with the Greens. Yeah, I heard a little bit about that, and I'm skeptical. Corbyn and the Greens differ on Ukraine. The Greens are already doing the other things Corbyn wants in Corbyn's own district, and I went out with one of their elected officials, Hamdosh, who was on our podcast, late last year. The Greens have elected people to the borough council and the sub-borough councils in Corbyn's district. So I haven't read the article you're talking about. I did hear a little bit about Corbyn forming a new party. And I think Corbyn is just such an old labor guy that, he thinks of the alternative having to be a kind of labor socialist aesthetic and identity, whereas the Greens are, environmental, human rights, not explicitly socialist, although the substantive program of the Greens in the UK is left social democratic. In other words, renationalize the railroads, refund the National Health Service, and expanding, public benefits, public housing, education, the kind of things that Corbyn's been talking about his whole career. So I will read that article, but I'm a little bit jaded by Corbyn, particularly his lack of clarity on what the hell is going on in Ukraine. He's one of these people calling for a ceasefire negotiations, and he should know full well Putin doesn't want a ceasefire. He doesn't want negotiations. He wants Ukraine. And so the question is, which side are you on, Corbyn? The imperialist or the people resisting imperialism? And he's not clear. Andrew Hager, if they associate with the Greenies, we could see the UK's Heritage Railways retrofitting eco-friendly components into a majority of their steam and diesel locomotives. Green railways for the win. Yeah, Andrew, I know you have a affinity and for the steam and diesel locomotives, but I think electrification is where the green transportation, rail transportation needs to go. Allowing for some niche uses of steam and locomotives, sort of for the historical heritage, but electrify the rails. Scout Trooper 164. Apparently, MAGA got annoyed with Musk to the point they don't mention him anymore. Wouldn't be surprised if that's why, besides tanking his company, he's stepping away from politics. I don't think he's stepping away. He's still got a lot of money. He's going to throw it where he wants. He does have disagreements with Trump, like on electric vehicles, obviously. So, that's, I think, part of the problem. Part of it was big egos. The biggest problem is it was hurting Musk's business, that Doge nonsense. So I think Musk is happy, Mog is not mentioning him. He's got problems with his businesses. But he's still interested in government contracts, particularly for SpaceX. But also, the benefits that were just cut in that budget bill for electric vehicles, the tax credits. Musk cannot be happy with that. So there's some differences there that were bound to come out sooner or later, and now they're out. Via email, comments on Trump's crypto dinner, which his administration claimed was held on his own personal time. Well, I don't know, so if he did something illegal and he claimed it was on his personal time, it's not an official act. So that Supreme Court ruling wouldn't apply. Did he just set up a trap for himself? I don't know. Trump used to accurately say that, crypto was a big scam, that there's nothing really behind it. It's, just people's opinion of what they're worth. And now he's in on a scam. And, I think the big problem here is he's using his office to create demand for crypto coins that him and his family are issuing. It's self-dealing. It's illegal under I don't know how many laws. But, he's getting away with it because the Justice Department is, in his pocket right now. So it's kind of disgusting that he talks about bringing manufacturing back, but he's making money off these crypto scams. Todich Ini. Get that one of these days. Have you seen Trump's push for nuclear? It makes me worried about reopening uranium mines here on the res, especially with our with our Trump-friendly president. So you must be talking about the Navajo or Deneb Reservation, where there are a lot of mines on or near it. I've seen the push for nuclear. I mentioned the executive order I think he issued last night, telling the NRC to speed up permitting of new nuclear power plants. And yeah, uranium, there's demand for that. We were buying a lot from Russia. I think we got sanctions on that finally, which was a major source. But yeah, you're right to worry about the reopening those mines on the, I guess it's the Navajo reservation, and uh, unless you're talking about another place, that I remember Winona LaDuke way back in the '70s documenting how uranium was concentrated on Indian lands, and so there may be other mines I'm not aware of, but um, yeah, we should be worried about the reopening uranium mines, which is uh, deadly. The uranium miners, the Navajo uranium miners, had a high rate of lung cancer from working with that radon and radiation in the mines. And then they had tailings that spilled, forget the name of the river, to the east of the reservation, which have not properly been cleaned up. There's still, what we need to do is clean up the mess the original mines made, not start new ones. So it's something to keep an eye on and to resist. Vicky Corden, any thoughts about the big, beautiful bill being stopped at the Senate? This bill will hurt a lot of people. Yeah, Vicky, I opened up with a count of what's in that big, ugly bill. It's the most reactionary budget bill in American history, in my estimation. And my assessment is with a 53 to 47 majority, Republican majority in the Senate, the bill's going to pass. There may be some modifications here or there, but the basic structure is going to pass. And you're right, it's going to hurt a lot of people. And it's going to waste a lot of money. And it's going to put the U.S. in a worse fiscal situation. And it's going to transfer wealth to the rich, super rich, at the expense of social programs that help working class people and poor people. It's a budget kind of reflects your moral priorities, and this shows the immoral priorities of the MAGA Republicans. So yeah, those are some of my thoughts. If you missed my opening, I gave a lot of numbers about how bad this bill is, and you can go back and hear that. Scout Trooper 164. Oh, and Harvard is now suing Trump for blocking their funding since they allow international students. Yeah, this ban on international students, a judge has blocked it temporarily, I guess, in temporary injunction. So there's more hearings. I think that's where it stands. Yeah, I mean, Trump is bashing Harvard because he thinks it plays with his MAGA base, which there's a lot of anti-intellectualism there and a lot of, sort of pride in knowing nothing. And it's an attack on education, research, science, and liberal education in the sense of an education that liberates the mind to critical thinking. That's what Harvard aspires to. There's a lot of indoctrination there, no doubt, but it's more liberal, more liberating than Trump and his ilk want. So, I mean, that's just another terrible thing that's going on. The attack on colleges and universities on the, false grounds that they're fomenting anti-Semitism. There's some anti-Semitic incidents here and there, and the universities clamp down on them and sanction the people that commit those acts. So this is just an excuse to demonize the pro-Palestinian protests, but also in general attack higher education, science. It's basically Trump's political ideology wants people stupid so they can go ahead and do what they want to do. And Harvard is resisting more than some of the Ivies and other colleges that have been attacked did, and good for them. It's kind of funny when the Harvard, which is about as establishment as you can get, as rich as you can get, is on the right side against the president in this one. But that's where we're at. Okay, I guess we're out of time. So I appreciate y'all being here. Thanks for adding to the conversation, particularly Charles with his links, and good questions and comments. Now I mentioned that on Wednesday I'm going to be giving a presentation on independent political action under Trump. And I'm writing an article on that, and I'll let you know when that's out. And I will probably be speaking on that at Socialism 2025 in Chicago on July 4th weekend. But this one is, all you have to do is get on the link, which should appear in the chat here. Maybe it's already up. If I get to I'm looking through. Yeah, okay. So click on that link and you'll find out how to get on it. And, I'm going to maybe speak 20, 30 minutes, give the basic picture, and then we'll have discussion. Reason Riffs wants me to stream more often. Once a week is not enough. I don't know. Maybe I don't watch podcasts as much as maybe a lot of you do. I do, or listen to them. I do follow a few. And if you ask me, I'll tell you which ones. Ask me next week. We'll be here again, live streaming at 3 o'clock Eastern time. I don't have a guest lined up, so we, may just be discussing the current events, or I may have one lined up. We'll see. I've got some feelers out for people, and we'll see what is going on. And I'm just reading Reason Riff's comment. Most of our problems are pan-national. We need a pan-national political movement, an internationalist movement. I completely agree. And that's why I have, spent a lot of the last 6 months in Ukraine, Georgia, Western Europe, Papua New Guinea, and Australia, making contacts with Greens and other people on the left, because, the corporations are global. The U.S. imperialism is a multi-state alliance. The axis of authoritarian governments that's forming around Putin and Xi and the North Koreans and the Iranians and others is international. And, we can't, defeat that just in one country, let alone one community. Although, as I will argue on Wednesday night, and I have been arguing, we need to start local, build strong local parties. We should be electing thousands, not just hundreds. We, the Greens, to local office as a foundation for getting in the state legislatures and the House, where we can have leverage. And so, Reason Risk mentions climate change. Yep, international problem. So the old slogan was think global, act local. I think we need to think and act both local and global. That's really what it's going to take. So anyway, everybody have a good week. We'll see you maybe Wednesday night or next week here on the live stream. Or you can listen on a podcast, which goes out Monday. So everybody have a good week and stay active. It does make a difference.